Welcome back to the London's Pretty Cool podcast. I am one of your hosts, Patrick Briggs.
And I'm the other host, Aaron Briggs.
We have another fantastic episode here today. This one has been, I feel like I say this over and over again. It's been in the works for a while, but this one in particular, we had to reschedule before just due to sickness and stuff. But this individual has been a major part of a ton of our earlier episodes, maybe without even realizing it. This guest has been a huge factor in the soundtrack of London, has a foothold on really the sound of the city and what's going on. We're so excited to have him here. We were talking before the episode, the studio may run under the radar, but I think it runs at the perfect level. We're talking to Simon Larochette of the Sugar Shack here in London. Simon, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
So, Simon, for the listeners who maybe don't know what the Sugar Shack is, because if you Google it, it comes to it's usually a maple bush out in the boonies, where you get your maple syrup when you go Sugar Shack London. Could you just do a little brief introduction of who you are and what Sugar Shack is?
So I am Simon Larochette, and I run the Sugar Shack. Sugar Shack is a recording studio in London, Ontario. Usually I don't want to overuse the word, but it does feel like we try to keep it as like a grassroots recording studio. We try to kind of cut out all the business parts of it and just make it sort of direct to artist and working with as many artists as possible. And also, we've always tried to keep things affordable here. I think it's really important in a city to have affordable spaces to do anything to do with art, visual art, music, all that. And so, yeah, we just provide recording services to nearly everybody who knocks on the door. Or as we talked about, it kind of runs under the radar. Some people don't know where it is, but anyone who sends an email, and nowadays it's people on Instagram, it's people email, Instagram, Facebook, everything. So, yeah, we just try to provide good quality recording and a memorable experience, especially for people who come in.
Yeah, the Sugar Shack absolutely is a memorable experience, and one that I've happily partaken in, for many a time. Do you mind giving us a teeny bit of a little history of the Sugar Shack, if you don't mind? Just a little backstory on how it got started and everything.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I came to London to go to a recording school. I wanted to do this. I wanted to own my own recording studio, a dream a lot of people have. And I went to the Ontario Institute of Audio Recording Technology. It's in South London. It's a world-renowned school. And to be perfectly honest, I do work there part-time as well. So I'm obviously going to speak well of it, but I went to school there, and when I worked there for a year after I was a student, and I started a studio in a building called the London Music Club, and as many venues in London, rest in peace. It was a place that a lot of people played music, and so I ran a studio in there, and while recording an album there, I came in contact with a guy locally named Andy McGoffin, a local legend in his own right, and he ran a studio called the House of Miracles. And essentially, to condense 3 years of work down, I ended up working with him. He called me one day and asked me if I wanted to take over the studio for a very fair price, and he said, and I could live here as well. So I took over, and I essentially would have done it at any cost, and he kind of let me take over the studio and just fill it with my own stuff and get the business started.
So cool.
Nice.
Yeah. And the House of Miracles in London was sort of like the Sugar Shack. It was a place that the musicians knew about. I've run into a lot of musicians over the years, especially sort of because it was definitely happening a lot in the early 2000s, and they would say, yeah, the only things I know about London are that Call the Office, House of Miracles. And those are the only things they knew about London. And I feel like I've kind of lived on with that tradition. And we work with a lot of artists from out of town here too. So they say, yeah, we know about the Sugar Shack. And that's kind of it now, because Call the Office isn't around anymore.
Not even the music hall?
Well, I mean, yeah, Rum Runners,
Yeah.
now that's kind of the place where people will play, of course. But I mean, Call the Office had that dirty, smelly, disgusting, lovely vibe.
The best way to describe it.
The London vibe,
Yeah.
really.
I mean, that kind of, yeah, it kind of sums it up, doesn't it?
Why did you choose the name Sugar Shack? So we took over from this guy, but why did you decide to change the name to Sugar Shack?
So I didn't feel it was right to take his name. He kind of said, "Oh, I don't want you to take the name," and I said, "Yeah, absolutely, I wouldn't want to, because this, like I said, this place had sort of a local lore to it." I when I first moved from South London into downtown London, I lived in a house on Ann Street. It's like Ann Street, St. George. It's sort of what I call the student ghetto in a way. It's got that vibe. It's just townhouses and all this. We moved into this little tiny house, yellow house, and we rented it from the family who runs Papa's Pizza, which is a famous London spot that some people will know. Rest in peace to Leo Papa, just passed away recently.
Mhm.
We rented a house from them, and we would, as is tradition in this case, you go into the pizzeria and you pay your rent in cash.
Mhm.
So we went into the pizzeria one day. We didn't think they actually made pizza. Turns out they make the best panzerottis in town. Some people may disagree, but I really do feel that. And we went in there, and Leo used to just sit there at a table, and he asked his son Tony. Again, sounds all made up, but he's just kind of asked, like, Tony, who are these guys? Who are these guys? And he said, "Oh, don't worry, Dad. They're just renting the Sugar Shack around the corner." And so we thought it was sort of a funny, like, drug house name, you know. So we're like, yeah, sure. Yeah, we'll just call that house the Sugar Shack. And we only lived there for like 9 months. And when I finally moved into the studio here, I think maybe 6 months in, I put a call out online, and what do people think I should name it? And my roommate from there said, Sam, he said, you should call it the Sugar Shack. And I liked the idea because the I've always felt that the name of a studio should represent whatever you see online. You see pictures, you see all this stuff. And when you see pictures of this place online, it does look like a cabin in the woods, even though it is directly on one of the main drags of London, Ontario, not far from Call the Office.
It's so cool how it's located, and we're not going to give it away where it is in the city or anything, because that is part of the charm of the Sugar Shack. It's just like the Dome or any sort of like house venue or anything like that. It is one of these things where, like you said, you can contact by DM, you can contact by email. There are ways to contact you to find out where it is, but we're not giving that out. That information is not just like, free to the world and everything. You kind of have to
Yeah.
ask about it. And I think that's what's, it is so funny because I've been going there for so long. Like, my parents are aware of it now, and they, will have conversations about it. You're like, oh my gosh, that studio, it's just, you're right. It's very, like, you wouldn't expect it, when you look at it from the outside, but the inside, I was just looking at photos of like some studio in Toronto or something like that, and I just, like, it kind of scared me a little bit in the way of, like, I know I like the Sugar Shack. This is the world that I like to live in and everything. And I think that leads into my next question, actually. What do you think differs Sugar Shack from other recording studios, not just in London but in general?
Uh, well, cost is what. No, I I like feel like I'm trying to sell it. I think what differentiates it from what people consider the studio business is that you can come into a place like this and be relaxed and also have fun, but also come up with a professional product. I mean, if anyone sees the pictures online, it doesn't look like a typical studio. And I don't say that as like a self-deprecating thing, but in a typical studio, you expect to see a big mixing board and glass, the piece of glass. I was called the fishbowl effect, like you're looking out onto the fish, the musicians. And we don't have that here. It's a little more low key, and it's just, it's built into a house. And so it can have its downsides sometimes. Like, yeah, we don't have perfect isolation between the booth and the room and the wherever the amp is, but you start looking back in music history, there's so many famous records that were recorded in these imperfect environments. And the more I hear those stories, obviously I tend to cherry pick them because it kind of proves my point. But I think it's kind of just carrying on a tradition of those types of places where it's, I think comfort and comfort really is the main factor. When you're recording, you don't want to be uncomfortable. If you're making art, if you're a painter and you're gonna sit down and make art, you're gonna want to probably be comfortable and you're going to want to be in a good headspace. And if your art does revolve or involve other people, you're going to want those other people to be kind of in the same mindset. So I really just try to pick up on that. If people come in here and they have a certain vibe, myself and also Kyle Ashbourne, who works here as an engineer, we really try to like fit into those environments. When you're working with musicians, especially, there's a lot of pretext to your session. There's 5 years of writing music sometimes, and so having a comfortable environment, also keeping the prices at a point where if someone has to sit there and catch their breath for 20 minutes and gather themselves, if they're recording an emotional song or if they're just worn out from working all day, they don't feel like they have to watch the clock. So we kind of try to keep it in a sweet spot of cost and comfort.
Love that.
That's great. What made you wanted to like get into recording to start? Like I know you wanted to go to OD art and that's like, but what made you like, were you always into music growing up? Was it just something that you've always felt like, hey, I want to become a producer?
I definitely I grew up music like as a kid. I was one of the violin kids. So I played violin for like, from like 5 until 13. I was a terrible student. I never practiced, did any of that. I kind of switched over when I got into junior high years. I was like, I want to do trumpet. That'll be more fun. And I was good at it, but I didn't practice. Was a terrible student at it, but I was like an okay player. And then that changed into like in my kind of junior high school years also became like a metalhead. So I got really into heavy metal, and that's sort of the heyday for me. That falls into the heyday of like downloading music for free. Like when
Mm.
you're a kid, and back then it was just like and I had a big CD collection. Like that sort of was a big part of my identity. Was I like buying albums, especially Norwegian and Swedish death metal bands, and there's a certain fandom that comes and community that comes with death metal and heavy metal where I would travel to see shows. It was like very much my passion. And then I also was always really into computers, and so essentially like as I got to the end of high school, I was like, I like computers, I like music, and then I found a school that taught it, and I got pretty lucky, I guess. And yeah, just a passion for music, and really like a kind of proclivity for using computers and just digging into software. Like as a kid, I used to just go on the computer and try to break things, and then we'd have to get the computer fixed because I broke the operating system or something. Yeah, and that sort of just set the whole thing up. Just that love of music and love of computers and technology.
That must really come in handy when tech starts to fall apart or break down, when you're in the studio. I've seen you before, jumping in behind and like big machines that intimidate the heck out of me. And you're like, just, oh, we got to mix this wire. Something's not coming out of here, or this and that. And it's that kind of stuff, right? You've got to be able to work in that moment and figure it out and everything. It's always so cool to watch.
Yeah, if I had just done it right in the first place, it wouldn't have broken, I guess, right? So no, I mean that's sort of the fun of it. Like I've wired everything in here. I'm not on like obviously it's very relative, but in my business there's people who they open up the equipment and they replace and I'm a little more limited in that. I never got too into doing that stuff. I still have to pay someone to fix all my amplifiers and all that. But yeah, they're like it's a cost thing at the end of the day. It's like if I had to buy every cable that I have in this studio and I didn't make them, it probably would have cost me 5 times as much just for the cables. So yeah, it's a survival mechanism.
If you can fix it, why buy a new one?
I mean, I've got amps from 1966, and I take them in, they get fixed, they work like they're brand new. So I love I think the old technology is just it's beautiful to me. Like audio equipment is just a beautiful thing, and old guitars and old amplifiers. I just, yeah. And it's not things that I necessarily loved when I was younger, but as I got into the business, I was like, yeah, these are cool. They're expensive, but they're
Yeah.
cool.
Oh, it's so fun to just like, be a Kijiji fiend and just like kind of like and hunt around for cool deals and different weird stuff. Especially when you have a studio, you're not like me and you're kind of like, well, I only have room in this side of the room for like 4 guitars, so I should probably sell one and replace it with another. You're like, well, I have a studio and I need a new tone. I need a new tone, so I'm gonna need that guitar. I'm gonna need that. I love
Yeah,
that.
if someone said to me once they came in here and they looked at all the equipment, and I mean, it's like it's not insane in studio standards, but for someone who hasn't seen it, it seems like 20 amps and 20 guitars or whatever. And they looked around, they're like, you don't use like any of this, do you? And I said, yeah, everything gets used about once a year, and if it doesn't, then I strongly consider selling it. But I kind of I try to keep it reasonable, and I really do try to keep the useful things, or at least things that will gain value, and maybe one day in my old age I can cash out or something.
It's gotta, that is the goal. I know we gotta get out of it at some point, right? But
Yeah, cashing out is the goal.
that's I don't know about you, but that's my retirement plan, is just to win the lottery and then I'll be good to go. But I think what we're kind of getting into, which is really interesting, is that most of your work comes from like word of mouth, and from good word of mouth. It's from people who have been here before and they tell other people about it, and it starts a community. Like it really feels like when I mentioned that I've worked at the Sugar Shack, or other people have mentioned it just creates this ebb and flow of like people all of a sudden, like, oh, like I met somebody who was just I don't want to ramble. I met somebody in Toronto from a band Jaguars while I was playing a mall crime show, and they go, "Oh, I saw your Incorrect Thought sessions at Sugar Shack. We are doing that now ourselves and everything, And it's things like that where you go, like, that's amazing, because you're going to be so stoked to meet those guys. It's going to be so fun. Make sure to go to the Jamaican spot right beside there and everything, like
Yeah.
it's fun, but how does that feel, that so many musicians are praising you in the Sugar Shack, and it's helping to get more clients and stuff? What's that like?
It's I mean, if I think about it too much, it's overwhelming. Like, I mean, I feel very, very, very fortunate. Like I've been able to build something up here that I wouldn't have been able to do without the previous owner. Like he's the crazy mind that decided to buy a house built in the late 1800s and turn it into a studio. I'm the lucky beneficiary of that, and then I also was able to sort of continue on that tradition. So it's sometimes when I think about it, and I'm sort of not one to like go on social media, oh, thank you so much to everyone, and like really like I don't know, I tend to just stay quiet most of the time, but the appreciation I have for the musicians who work here, and the community that sort of just gets built through years of working yeah, it's overwhelming when I think about it. And I'm so grateful that I've been in a position for so long to be able to do this for a community, and to have people who work here, Kyle Ashbourne and Jamie Dean, like they add to that as well. And, yeah, it's sometimes when it's just it's when I sold merchandise, like I sold the t-shirt I'm wearing now. I sold a bunch, and I only do it maybe every 4 or 5 years, and then I start seeing people out with it, or one of my old friends from high school who lives in Vancouver. Hey, yeah, I'll buy one. Like, and you start to feel the support and everything. But most of the time, we're so busy here that we kind of forget to like that there is a weird community out there of Sugar Shack aficionados, I guess. But no, I'm mostly grateful, and I'm very honored that I was able to like I said, continue the tradition that was essentially the House of Miracles. That was like this kind of need to know, musician centric place where people could record, make records, and sometimes move on to bigger and better things, and sometimes just make great records there their whole careers. whatever point I'm involved in at the process, or any of us engineers here, I think we're all very, very grateful.
It's, I wanted to say that if you ever do your shirt launch again, please let me know because I missed it. And now my boyfriend, who's recorded with you multiple times, is like, I asked him what he wants for Christmas. He goes, "Can you get me a Sugar Shack shirt? Because we missed it." And I'm like, I can't get it. This is an impossibility.
Yeah,
Ask
my
me for
dad
it.
asked me for Christmas. He's like, "Can you? Oh yeah, by the way, like when you come up for Christmas, can you like bring an XL Sugar Shack shirt?" And I was like, "I can't. I don't have any." And my brother-in-law, "Hey, so can you bring up?" I'm like, "I can't." So in the spring 2023, we'll do a fall spring drop.
Perfect. I'll
Yeah,
keep
get
Oh,
that
some
one in mind.
tie-dye. Get some tie-dye colors in there or something. I would love that.
ooh, yeah, I'm gonna write that down. I like that
Yes.
idea.
Yes.
Hey.
Awesome. I'm excited.
So if there's people out there that are listening now, upcoming bands, and they want to record with you, you kind of mentioned that they either can DM or email, but also if they're not sure, I don't know if I'm not the musician, so I don't know if there's like a process or an approach that like, what's your process and approach that could people, musicians listening, being like, oh, that's exactly what I want.
I think we try really hard here to allow bands to sound like themselves, and I think that's a really positive thing. Bands come in here, and it's just because we are word of mouth, and we tend to attract the same type of people we work with. It's a lot of like the band comes in, we're like, okay, what do you sound like? Let's just make some music, instead of like, oh, tell me the bands exactly that you want to sound exactly like. You can definitely pay homage to artists without copying the sound. And I think that the main goal that we always have here is like originality. Um, and also, while like making it sound unique and also making it sound really great, I kind of have a philosophy that, so people will say, for example, like I'm trying to think of a legendary record in my head, like for example, like not even a record I know that well, but people like the Weezer, I think it's the Blue Album, it's kind of like the big one. They're like, yeah, we really love that album. And then I always kind of think like, but when Weezer made the Blue Album, they probably weren't trying to copy something else. They were probably trying to make something unique. So I try to take a little bit of that, while trying to still, make it sound great on a Spotify playlist or Apple Music or anything, so it can sit next to other modern things. And so if you want to sound unique, uh, I mean, we do kind of everything. Like we could also make it sound like another band, but I really like the projects where it can sound unique. And I think musicians like that as well. So that's kind of the biggest sell I can give to bands who want to come here.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I would say that like you said, the comfortability of the studio, like the vibe that everybody brings in there. It's just this sense of like I can really do this, and it turns out that I can accomplish these weird ideas that I have in my head. And you and Kyle are so great to work with when it comes to like tossing ideas out there or something, or like Kyle, I've worked with him a bunch at the studio, and he's great for that, where he's like, all right, I want to do backup vocals here. I want to have hand claps here, and if you're not down for that idea, he's totally with that as well. But he's in to be like, let's make this the best it can be. And if you don't like it, we'll take it out, but let's do as much as we can, as so that you have options and can figure out like the craziest, coolest sounds that we can find, kind of thing, which is so fun to have that opportunity in the studio.
Yeah, I have like a fear, or not a fear, but yeah, one thing is I have a fear that someone will say, "Oh, Simon's records sound the same." Like and I mean, I don't really care, but I just kind of go with that theme. And then the other thing is that I want to make a sound that no one's made before and that no one will ever be able to make again. Maybe not even myself. Okay,
Mhm.
because when you like, I think being a recording engineer and recording studio is different than being a studio that makes records. It's sort of cliche to me, but I do think that doing recordings is coming in, blasting through things, getting it done. Okay, it's finished. We achieved what we needed to achieve. Whereas I think making records is those moments, and you would be able to attest to this, where you remember the time we plugged in that one guitar pedal. Like,
Mhm.
oh, you remember the time where someone said, oh, go out there and play it with the drummer, and you remember the energy. So I think making records is kind of grabbing a time capsule and also giving those special moments that, you know, when someone says, should I work at the Sugar Shack, all these kind of memories should flood back. Whereas if you just went and did something clinical in a very expensive place, it might not be as memorable. It depends on the situation, but I like to think that we kind of like, we like to make records here. And if you want to do, you know, something that's going to be dynamic and thorough and really represent your band and or yourself as an artist in all aspects, I think this is the kind of place where you have the freedom to do that.
It's so interesting. And I think I think I can add, if I can add to that a little bit as well. Like, so you do like recording live off the floor sessions like we talked about earlier. There's you know, the incorrect thought sessions that work out of the Sugar Shack.
Mm-hmm.
Really great opportunity for anybody who doesn't know. You know, you can like get a video done of your performance as well. They'll do an incredible recording of it. Mall Crimes, my own band did it. Pro Wrestling, my own band did it, and all the recordings sound so good, it's ridiculous. Like Pro Wrestling's released all that stuff. Like all the videos are so good, and that opportunity, that process is so cool. But it's also, like you said, it's so different than making a record. I've had the opportunity as well to like spend a couple days at the studio and take the time and go, like you said, hey, you know what, this one isn't working, let's like take a break, you know, or like, hey, like for this guitar sound, let's like walk in there and like hold it up against the amps, you know, and like let's make some weird stuff and everything. And you have the time to do that. It's really interesting. Like I know you kind of expanded on it, but like do you enjoy like any one type you know, more when you're like, do you enjoy the making the records most? Do you enjoy like people coming in and having like a quick session where you're doing a live off the floor and it's just kind of fun and no pressure or whatever, or like, you know, just those quick like, hey, I'm coming in for a day, I'm getting my thing done and I'm getting out of there, thank you for the records and here's your money kind of thing?
There's, for me, there's no preference. It's the same with styles of music. There's not necessarily a preference. I really like the variety. So if I had like, if I had to sit here and make death metal albums for the next 10 years, I wouldn't be happy with that. If I had to sit here and make folk records for the rest of my, you know, for like 10 years, I wouldn't like that. It's all about the variety for me. And the same goes for projects. Like if I'm doing an album, there is a lot of, an album is a process and there's a lot of different emotions involved and tinkering and like it's not like if you record 3 songs it takes you a weekend and then you do 9 songs, it's not going to take you 3 weekends. There's going to be a lot of like, oh well, these 2 songs sound different, let's do different versions, or say they sound too similar, let's do different versions, or let's, you know, redo the vocals. There's a lot more that can go wrong. So sometimes I'm doing a bunch of albums and it's like a heavy process and I'm working with the same people and we get stuck and all this. And then someone comes in, they're like, we just want to do 3 songs in a day. And I'm like, great. And they're like, also, whatever you mix at the end of the day, we're going to put out. And I'm like, okay, cool. It's a different challenge. So as
Mhm.
long as I'm getting a little bit of stimulations in different parts of my brain, that's good for me. Like I love, sometimes it's literally like a metal band until 11 p.m. and then the next morning at 10 a.m. it's like just someone with their acoustic guitar just playing as quietly as possible. And I love it all. And I like variety the best. And you kind of have to like variety if you want to, you know, do enough work in this business to make a living.
What would you say is the hardest genre to record?
That's a good question. I mean, metal stuff is hard. Like that's what I kind of thought I wanted to do when I went to school, and I quickly realized that it's not what I wanted to do, and I didn't have the skills to do it well. And then I think there was a couple over the years, and then that I did where I thought they turned out pretty good, and I was happy with them. And then a few years back, I did one with a band that I really liked. This band Saren from Toronto. I think they just broke up, but and it was cool. Like I was just like I got to make a metal record, and I was really proud of it, and everyone really liked it. I was involved, and um, So I would say that the heavier stuff can be tougher. Also, I think a lot of times when I say heavier, like punk bands usually are pretty agreeable. Like they're like, we just want to sound angry. But like metal bands are like, okay, but does the snare sound enough like between the Black Album and Slayer's Rain in Blood, like somewhere in between, and they get really picky about that stuff, which can be fun. And as I grew my skills over the years, I mean, it's been like almost 14 years now. I kind of got like, you know, I started to learn the tricks, and I can do that better. But yeah, it's tough to say. Also, where people are playing live more, like if I'm recording a singer songwriter and they want to sing and play guitar at the same time, that's tough too. It creates a whole other slew of challenges, and especially you got to do the song a lot of times before you get it right. So but sonically and technically, definitely the more metal and just that type of stuff.
It has to be so precise, right? And there's like no room for all these audio inconsistencies of just like, squeaks and wails and all this stuff. It has to be so like, yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's again, like once in a while I do a record where it's like, okay, you're gonna fix everything, you're gonna make everything, like I have the ability to do that. I can I think the thing a lot of people don't understand is that on these really technical albums, they every single time the drummer hits a drum, whether it's a kick drum or a snare drum or even a cymbal, there's a cut made and it's put perfectly in time. And then same with every single note the bass player plays, every single note the guitar player plays. There are albums like that. And I
Wow.
possess the skills to do that. I don't like to do that. That's not my preference. But if sometimes there'll be a song and it sounds really cool, and the band played it, and then there's one section where we all kind of agree, okay, this part, everything should be really tight. I don't like to paint with a broad stroke and say let's fix everything. It's like, let's fix everything on one part where it has like an impact. Like that's, at the end of the day, those technical decisions are also musical decisions. And some styles of music, it works. Sometimes it sounds better if you touch nothing and just keep it really raw.
When I've had experience of you guys doing that in the studio, it's always like magic. It's like this moment of it's like this moment of utter magic. Because I've done my own home recordings before, you've got your own like version of technicality with that. Oh, I can do this, I can do that, or whatever. And then you'd record with your drummer and your band here and or whatever, and they'd go, hey, that, like, your drummer would go, hey, that little spot right there isn't like really consistent or whatever. And I'm suddenly stressing my head like, I don't want to go in there and record this again. Like I thought we had it down, and all of a sudden Kyle will just be like, oh yeah, got it, and then 2 seconds later, like it's plays perfectly. And then he had to explain to me exactly what you just did, and I was like, it blew my mind. It is literally like studio magic. It's so cool to see the process.
I mean, it's maybe the most boring thing about the process, but it's satisfying, and the joke always is like, hey, do you think you could fix that? And then I've already fixed it, because you can fix it. It's like literal, you can fix it in less than a second. You just look at it, cut it, move it, and then someone, they'll look at me like, or yeah, they'll hear, I'll hit play and I'll go, well, are you sure there's a mistake there? And it's fixed. They go, oh, weird, I don't hear it anymore. Like, yeah, I fixed it. I fixed it. And they're like, oh, okay. It's kind of like playing a video game, essentially.
That's so cool.
I want to kind of change the direction a little bit because
Yeah.
we can see him in the background right now. I've heard so much about your studio cat. It's Winston, right?
It's Winston, yeah.
Yeah, so I just want to let the listeners know I've seen it, especially on the Thunder Queens social media. They're always posting about Winston being in the studio. Could you let our listeners know who he is, how he became a studio cat, and how he's so relaxed with all of this metal and punk music going on in the background?
Yeah, when I first moved into this place, there was a definite issue with mice, as any house built in 1881 would have. And I quickly realized that, and as much as I could do to try to get rid of them, I knew it was going to be permanent. So I got Winston out of a barn. My wife's family, her father had a farm out in east of Toronto, and when I was looking for a cat, her family said, "Oh, there's this really friendly cat in the barn." And when we went over and we're like, "Yep, that's the one. He's great." So we brought him over here. I mean, it was a bit of a risky situation. Like I'm Googling like barn cats litter training. And people are like, the barn cat peed everywhere. It
Um,
just worked. Like we got him and he's a people person. When I come into the studio in the morning before the session, he doesn't come out and see me. But as soon as a second person comes in and he hears us talking, he's in here. I don't know. It just kind of worked. He just had the right temperament. He got used to it quickly, and he's getting up. He's like 11 now, I think.
oh man.
So, and I've had him since I got him. I got this place the November of 2011, and then we got him in February. So he's been around all that time, and hopefully many more years. But he's a big hit. Unfortunately, there are situations where people have allergies to cats, so I keep the meds on hand, and if I got to keep him out of the room, I got to keep him out of the room. But he's great. That's part of that vibe. Like someone, they, they're just like, oh yeah, I was in there. We worked on this album, and when they're having stressful moments, they play with the cat, and he's pretty cute. And as long as he's not clawing you, which he does sometimes, but he's more crotchety in his old age, but he's a hit here. I still haven't made merch with him on it either, but I've
Oh
got some
yeah.
plans always in my head. I know, because I want it to be a classic piece, and if I make it, it'll probably only be once.
Mhm. We'll
Yeah,
get
so he's good to have around, and yeah, love him. He's the best. Everyone loves Winston. There's and he's also a bit more of a dog than a cat. So I've had people come in here, and the classic story. My friend Brandon came in here, and I was like, oh, it's Winston. He's like, I don't really like cats or whatever. And then he said that he told me this later, but one day Winston came over, and the classic move is Winston walks over, stands on your lap, and then he just falls over. And he said that in that moment when Winston fell over, he was like, I love cats now. And he's got two now. He's got two of his own
Oh,
cats, and he still comes over and he's like, oh, Winston, you're my favorite cat in the world.
and he has two of his own.
And he's got two of his own, so
Yeah.
that tells you. Yeah.
Inspirational. I love that. He
That's
is
so
the
great to
best.
hear because a lot of cats they would hide as soon as it gets loud or they're eating all your wires or whatnot. So
Yeah, that happened to my brother. He had a roommate with a cat, and he's like, "Oh, it's so cute. Yeah, the cat always comes over and lays at my feet when I'm working on my music." And when he moved out like 5 years later, he just found all these chewed up wires under the desk.
that's
Now
why
I
he
see.
was there.
Yeah, I think Winston, like, I thought, he'd knock stuff over in the night and stuff. One time ever, I've come back to like one thing that was knocked over, and that's it, and it was fixable. So
Amazing.
he's right here. He's the best. He's just sleeping on the couch.
He's the dream cat. There you go.
Yeah, he is.
If you don't mind, I'll turn it back a little bit back to the studio here and everything.
Sure.
But, Winston is just as important to this question, I will say. But why do you feel, we kind of touched on it earlier, but like, why do you think it's important for the local scene to have access to a local recording studio like the Sugar Shack? Like you said, it's affordable. I'm answering your question for you. Let me let you answer that question.
Well, I mean, I think it's unfair to just, that it needs to be a place like the recording studio. There are people who are more affordable than us. In the jam spaces there, people do recordings in the jam spaces and at what's it called, City Center Storage. And that's fantastic. I don't think it like sometimes what we do here, even though we're considered affordable for what we provide to some people, we're out of reach. So I think it's really important to support people recording anything in a city this size, because if there's no one there to record it, no one's going to hear it. I think there's a lot of cases of bands who are born, survive, and then die in city center storage, and no one ever hears it because
Mm,
they maybe
Yeah.
don't feel like there are options in town to record them. And And I try to encourage young bands to record as well, because it's so important, A, for you to record your music for people to hear it, but the process of recording something, loving it, then hating it, then loving it again, and then hating it, and then one day just realizing, you know what, whatever, I'll make something else, if you love it or hate it. I think that helps bands so much, even in the live show. Once you hear a version of your band playing the song, as best as possible, maybe a few things are fixed up here and there, or it's just a lot of, you play the song 5 times and then you pick the best one. Once you hear that best version, every time you play the song, you have a benchmark. Like, okay, I just finished playing the song at, Music Hall, Rum Runners, or Palisade. Like, okay, I finished playing the song. Was that better or was that worse than the recorded version? And then you always have something to reach up to. And so when I meet high school bands, I always donate recording prize to the London Music Award Battle of the Bands, High School Battle of the Bands,
Nice.
because it's so, like, a band who hasn't recorded in high school, 25, they're going to have less experience than the band who did record. And what they find out here is that we support them and we allow them to make their decisions, and whatever they don't like, we won't do. And I try to, like, within reason, try to make it how the kids want it to sound. That's a really important experience. And I've had too many people come in here and say, oh yeah, in their, sometimes people in their 30s, and they'll say, yeah, I recorded once before and I was in high school and it was terrible. And the engineer just said, yeah, you have to play to a metronome. You can't play it without a metronome, and you have to. And then, and also, he wouldn't let me use my guitar because he didn't like my guitar. And I'm like, that's, for that to be someone's introduction to this is really bad.
Yeah.
And so I really encourage people to just find someone. It's better to have someone that you trust opposed to someone who costs the most. So if you trust someone who costs less than us, go there, work with someone you're comfortable with, and then maybe one day you come here, and then maybe one day you go back to them. I think there's enough work to go around in a city like this, and I think that any sort of, like, real competition between recording engineers is silly. Because everyone, like, if someone's out there providing service, try it out, meet with them, make sure you're comfortable with them. And sometimes, it's going to work here and sometimes it won't. And I don't know, I guess it's just affordable recording means that, especially now that you can just finish a song one week, put it online the next week, it means people will hear you and they'll like it, and they'll, or not like it, but there'll be more support. And I think that's super important. It's so much, it's a lot of work to do. And I think I hate the fact that some bands have never been heard. And you hear stories from back in the day too, like, yeah, I was in a band, we were really good, and then we broke up before we recorded, and no one will ever hear that music. I think that's too bad.
That's very true, right? There's so, you said it best, right? Like, yeah, there's so many bands that have lived and died without anybody hearing them, and that's a tragedy. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, some of them maybe didn't need to be heard,
Yeah, I
but
shouldn't
we
say
don't know, right?
it's
you
not an
never
umbrella
know.
statement. It's not an umbrella statement. Absolutely.
I'm just messing around.
Do you get more artists coming from London to the Sugar Shack, or is it outside the city?
That's interesting. I think there was a time there where, I think pre-COVID and into COVID, where it was 50-50, maybe even more so, coming from out of town. I think bands in Toronto, well, bands anywhere, there is this kind of idea that, well, if we leave town, it's going to be better. Like, bands from London leave town, like, it'll be better if we go to Toronto. But it also, and then engineers in London may complain about that, but whatever. But it's true with bands in Toronto. They're like, oh, it'll be better if we go to London. And I've had lots of artists, like, I'd say it's still, I don't know what the percentage is right now. I have to actually, like, look at my folder of artists I'm working with right now, but it's usually, between 40 to 50% out of town artists. And that's Hamilton. I've over the years, I've always had an odd number an oddly high number of people from Burlington. There's always
Oh,
Oh,
like there's like a big music thing there. Toronto, a lot of Toronto people, sometimes outside of there, but not as much. But also for them, like we put bands up when they come here, so there's beds and there's couches and stuff. So I tell them, yeah, you come to London, it'll be cheaper than a comparable studio in Toronto. No fault to those studios, higher rent, but it'll be more affordable here. The working hours will also be longer, and you can stay for free. And there's a kitchen if you want to cook meals. And I think they look at the cost benefit analysis and they're like, yeah, and hopefully they also like the work we do. Yeah, so it's it like sometimes it's 50% of the work I'm doing, and yeah, other times it's less.
so cool. What's the furthest somebody has ever come from?
Furthest, I want to say actually just being like, yeah, we're coming there, not like just by happenstance. It might have been Ottawa. I think there was an artist from Ottawa once, and it
wow.
was they were like, oh, we really like this one album that you did. Can we come? I'm like, yeah, sure. One time I got an email from a band from France,
Oh, I thought you were
and they
London,
were like,
England.
yeah, well, they were. I was like, you guys know I'm in London, England, right? And they knew they were like referencing a record that I'd done for the band Chastity. Like, we really like Death Lust, the record by Chastity. Like, and I'm like, hey, thanks. No, I'm in London, Ontario, like Canada, and they were like, yeah, we thought maybe. At first, we thought London, England, and then we saw that it was London, but we are going to come to North America. And then they ended up going with some this guy Will Yip, who he did like the most famous like title fight record,
Yeah.
Shed, I think. And I mean, the guy I'm like, oh yeah, yeah. Like they ended up doing it with him, and I'm like, oh, he's got a nicer studio than I do, and a crazy resume too. The guy's like pretty legendary. But even just to be considered, I was like, oh, that's kind of cool.
That's a good conversation, like, good names to be mixed in with. Will Yip is like, yeah, like probably in like the punk, like sort of like, yeah, that title fight style scene, like the biggest name in production. So that's like, I like that,
Yeah,
Simon. I like that.
yeah. He's got like videos online where he's like, I'm going to run you through my signal chain. And he's using all the stuff that I use. So I'm like, okay, the company that makes the stuff that I use hired you to be the spokesman. Yeah. And I mean, and it's funny because I ended up listening to the record that the band did, and it was amazing. It was a great record.
Mhm.
I was like, yeah, I wouldn't have made something this good.
Speaking of which, what have been, if you can answer this, well, you try, what have been your top three favorite records that you've recorded at Sugar Shack?
Oh, geez. That's a, that's, everyone's, I hope none of my clients are listening right now. Um, no, it's to me, it's not always about necessarily about the quality of music, but it's sometimes just how everything comes together, and then what the records kind of mean to your career, especially. Um, but that's it's hard too because you really enjoy the. I'm kind of like stalling for time so I can think of this, but you do tend to be the most excited about the newest things that you do. So it is
Mhm.
kind of hard to look back. But I think I can't. Yeah, favorite's a tough word, but I think that the most like influential and like life changing ones for me, like obviously when I did the Single Mothers album, Negative Qualities,
Mhm.
that was a very interesting time, and it was a whirlwind that involved a lot of just it was a all I can really say was that it was a weird time, and I was given the chance to do it, and I did it, and it turned out really good, and I was really proud of it. Like I didn't mix the record. I remember we handed it off to mix, and I was like happy. I was like, I didn't feel like I was ready to do it back then, but the way that album did and what it did for that band was great. And I remember like there's pieces of equipment I have. I'm like, oh yeah, I bought that during that album, and like I remember this moment, and there was a lot of stories that are best left between the band and I, and nothing insane happened, but just like there was a lot of weird stuff at that time. So that one was big, and it did really well. There's also like the band Chastity. That album Death Lust was really cool. I just really liked it. The album was a bit of a journey and involved a lot of like doing it finishing it. Like at one point we were listening to the final versions of that album and I was like, great, it's done. And then 6 months later we were like recording more songs for it because the label was like, and I don't have to deal with the labels much, but they were like, yeah, we need different songs. And so there were a lot of like redos and stuff. And that I learned a lot during that process, and the album was well received. And it was the beginning of me working with that band for a really long time. They were just in here like a week or earlier. At the end of last week they were here.
Oh, cool.
So it's like a really special relationship to me. And then more recently, if I were to jump in, it would be the record Mushroom Death Sex Bummer Party by Wine Lips.
Oh,
Because
wow.
I loved that record while we were making it. I loved it when we were mixing it. I loved it when it was done. And like even records, I don't listen to records I've done a ton because I've really like spent a lot of time listening to it, but I kept coming back to that one. And it's just recently been sort of like getting its dues. Like they've sort of shot up on the Spotify stuff for whatever reason the overlords have decided. But it's starting to get them recognition, and they're starting to tour, and it's one where people come like, I consider my work to be done for the artists and not really for like people who love engineering and producing. So that's to say, like, I don't often get people like, oh, I loved this sound of the snare on that one album you did, like, but the band is always really happy and they come back. But that's one where people come to me like, wow, what did you do? That record sounds so good. And I'm like, I don't know. We just kind of made it. Like we did the record the way I make all my records, and it's really nice to see that band getting their dues, and they've gotten some like placements and stuff, and and also it's a proud thing because the band they're out there making money right now, which is, as all musicians know, that is a tall order. A very tall order. So yeah, I would say those three records that come to mind off the top of my head, but there's like 100 other ones I can think of, like a literal 100. And yeah, but those are kind of ones that I think I always kind of come back to, and I'm like, wow, that was really something else that we did. Like we really made an album. Like those are the ones I'm very proud of. And then recently too, like my friend Alex Mason put out an album, Ghost of the Great Lakes, and that one was like a personal journey of Alex and I. Like he went through a lot through the making of that record, and it turned out great, and I love it, and I'm hoping it'll get its dues eventually as well. And yeah, that's kind of the most recent one that kind of released that I was like had a lot of emotional attachment to.
Do you have any advice kind of for listeners, as we do have like OER in London as well as the MIA program? So lots of producers coming out of London. What do you have any advice for some listeners who might be interested in becoming producers or getting into the musical recording on like what they can do to get started, or like how to get musicians to start recording with them, all that kind of advice?
Yeah, so it's funny. So I work part-time at OER. So I give a lot of this advice to my students. I can't give it away for free on the podcast. No, honestly, what I try to tell people a lot is that the things to remember is that although recording and producing and all this, it's like an artistic business. I'm trying to help these people create art, and something that's going to be essentially now with streaming and all this, it's going to last forever. Like it's just there, hopefully forever. So what I tell them is you have to remember that although it's art and all this, and it's a customer service business. People are coming to me and they want me to provide them with a service. If you're lucky, the people will also ask for your opinion and they'll also listen to your ideas, but that's not a given. So, and especially when you're first starting out, and if you've gone to school for engineering and you're just starting out, you don't actually know as much as you think you do. Your knowledge is more in the technical realm. And when you're making an album, the technical, or even just recording a song, the technical stuff should actually take a back seat to all the artistic stuff. And so you have to listen to your musicians. Everything I've learned in the studio, after having gone to school and learned all the initial like heavy lifting, everything else I've learned, like what guitars people like, what amps people like, just the things people like to hear, the things they don't like to hear, the positive reinforcement they like, the negative reinforcement they don't like, all of that is just from listening to musicians.
Mhm.
And when you come out of it's sort of like jazz musicians always say that, you know, after you go to school, you get a jazz degree, you spend a couple of years unlearning everything you learned and sort of coming back to terms with like, what is music? Because playing scales in all 12 keys and practicing for, you know, 20 hours a day, that's not really what music is. And so you have to both sides. So I always try to tell people you have to remember you're providing a service. And then sometimes I get really lucky and the artists let me come up with ideas, and like Pat was saying, you're like, hey, let's do hand claps. And but when you're starting out, they don't trust you necessarily. And so if you're like, hey, let's do hand claps, they're like, we hate hand claps. And you have to be like, okay, paying me. So anyway, it's like best idea wins. But at the end of the day, the person paying you is you know, the customer is not always right, but the customer decides what's going to happen next.
Mhm.
And if you don't do that, people aren't going to want to work with you again. They're going to say, "Oh yeah, we didn't like working with so and so because we asked them to do something and they said no." And I
Yeah,
just think, well, yeah, you don't want to do that.
yeah, holy moly, that would be tough, right? You're say like, I want to do this on my record. No, I don't. You're not doing that
Doesn't
on.
work.
You're not doing it on records with my name on it or whatever. Like, oh man, that's tough. No.
Yeah, you go to a restaurant and you're like, "I'll have the salmon," and they're like, "You don't want the salmon." Like, okay, okay. Like,
But I
what
want.
do I want? Yeah, like, yeah, and it does get lost because the kids coming up, they think like when you get in the studio, someone's going to be like, "What do you think? What do you think it should sound like?" And really, most of the time, you have to ask the artist, "How do you feel? What do you want? Do you like that? Do you not like that?" And if there's a disagreement, you can have a talk about it, and you can say, "Well, I kind of felt like, you know, maybe that thing's too loud." And if they're just like, "No," you're like, "Okay, it's your thing. Your name's going on it. You're going to have to live with it." And that's just the way it is. And I've had situations like that where I thought the artist was wrong. The artist said, "No, we don't like it. We want it this way." And I said, "Okay, I don't think that's a good idea." And they're like, "No, no, no, we want it down." I'm like, "I don't think that's a good idea." And then in the end, like 2, 3 years later, I'm like, they were 100% right. I had no idea what I was talking about.
Hmm. You don't hear it
Yeah,
till down the road. Absolutely. You suddenly it makes
yeah.
sense. Is there any upcoming record releases from the Sugar Shack that you are excited about that you want to let people know about? Anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, for myself, like I mentioned already, the Alex Mason album, Goes to the Great Lakes, really cool album, very cinematic, and like just a guy with a great voice and an incredible heart. And you know, definitely personal attachment there. But I do, his music is music that I feel like most people I've played it for, they're like, yeah, you know, this is nice, and he's just got a way of delivering it. So that's one that just came out recently that I really like. Um, can't even without like looking at my hard drive. I kind of just like I like remove my work from my brain sometimes, and but without looking at what's coming out, I don't even know what's coming out honestly. Because sometimes, like I mean, Alex's album we've been working on for 3 years. Like the last session I had before the initial real lockdown was doing strings on his album, and then that was kind of like almost the end of it, and then it still didn't come out for 2 years.
Hmm.
What else? I mean, someone's gonna kick me for not mentioning their thing, but yeah, that one. Kyle just did a single mother's album too that came out, and that's exciting too. I mean, the fact that they're still working at the Sugar Shack is amazing. And
Yeah,
I
that's
always
cool.
joke, I'm like, yeah, they make their best albums at the Sugar Shack. But you know,
Unbelievable.
so yeah, so that's exciting. I mean, just to have a bunch of people through here and a bunch of records coming out, like, but yeah, it's yeah, I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. I don't know people's release dates all the time, so I mean, I'm working on an album with Wine Lips right now, so that's exciting. And it's about, I think we're doing a few more songs, but they've been on tour in Europe. So it's like, yeah, when we come back to Canada, we'll book some sessions and finish the album. And and then when I'm done this, I'll look at my hard drive and be like, oh, I forgot about those 10 other releases coming out. So my apologies to any clients of mine, but especially we're doing this recording like just before Christmas, so I'm like,
Oh
my
yeah.
brain's like elsewhere.
Oh yeah. No artist should take any offense here. The man is hardworking. All right. He's hardworking on your albums. Don't blame him for forgetting sometimes when they're coming out. I don't know dates beyond 2 weeks from now most of the time, so that's how it works. We are a London-based podcast. We are going to get to some London-based questions, but before we do that, is there anything else that you wanted to mention about the Sugar Shack, about yourself, how people can find you on social media, anything like that, Simon?
Yeah, I mean, if you look up Sugar Shack Recording Studio, you can find us on Google there. I have a pretty basic website, but just so people can see pictures, see a spiel about it. And on social media, on Instagram, we're at the Sugar Shack _. And I constantly get tagged in posts from people who are like at some cafe called the Sugar Shack in California, and I always repost it to the Instagram. So because I appreciate that, because also in my head I'm like, hey, the more I'm reposting things that are tagged the Sugar Shack, probably the higher I get when people look us up. But that's like, we're really only active on Instagram, and then the website, you can reach us through there, like to email us and all that. And honestly, what I always tell people is that if you're ever curious about recording here, find out who's recorded here and talk to them directly. Ask them, how was your experience there? Should I work there? Because it's possible that someone would say, yeah, they do more of this, and I think you're more of that, so maybe find someone else. Or they would say, yeah, absolutely, it's a perfect fit. Again, word of mouth is really, I appreciate that everyone does help us with the word of mouth thing, because I've never had to do any advertising, and the schedule is always full for all of us here, and it's that's wonderful. But yeah, so ask around, like ask people what they think, and get honest reviews. Like don't just ask the people or our friends. Ask people who you don't know. Hey, I saw that you recorded at the Sugar Shack, and yeah, I just think that's always the best thing. And yeah, I don't know. I guess that's it. Yeah, we're just Instagram. I try to keep the Instagram light and funny. I'm sort of 2023. I'm sort of planning on like being a little more active on the Instagram and all that. But there is a sort of benefit sometimes to being like enigmatic. Like the studio, I don't hear much from the Sugar Shack, but when I bought this record and I looked on it and it said recorded at the Sugar Shack, and I'm like, oh, like that's how I'd like people to see our names. Anyone who works here, like I want them to buy an album they didn't know we recorded, see it, and then say, oh wow, okay, yeah, they're doing real stuff. Yeah, so go to Grooves, buy albums, ask the employees at Grooves, what albums here can I buy that have been recorded at the Sugar Shack, and they'll be able to show you a few, I bet.
Absolutely, they will. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Those peeps there are knowledgeable. Absolutely.
They're the best of the best.
They're my boys. Well, all right, we're gonna get into some London-based questions, as we are London's Pretty Cool podcast. As I've been liking to mention of this first question, it's usually the toughest question of the podcast. It really tests where your heart lies, and you're gonna really have to debate here and there, or it might be the easiest question. Where is your favorite place to eat in the city?
Family Circle Restaurant.
Oh, that's such a good
And it's
one.
because it's like, they've been here since when I first moved in here. The kitchen wasn't operable, and I used to just go there and sit by myself and eat dinner when they used to serve dinner there. Lunch menu, underrated. Breakfast is good. It's classic for breakfast, but like the lunch menu if you get the chicken sandwich, it's absolutely great. But yeah, and for me, that place, it's a culmination of like, it's a strange place, because it's like a diner and a house. It's like Greek owned, so there's like some Greek menu items, and then the breakfast is like just not really. It's like a classic breakfast, but also I've never seen a breakfast that looks like it. And also the waitresses there, they make you feel at home, and it's just been yeah, I love it there. It's the best.
I gotta just second vouch that because my boyfriend used to live in Soho area and we'd always go to family circle and it would be like right at the time where I could still get breakfast and he could get lunch. So it would be like that perfect mix of like he'd get a really nice lunch and I'd have my full breakfast and it's one of the best places.
Shout out to the waitresses Chris and Kathy, and also Spiro, the owner. Shout out to them.
Shout out.
Speaking a little bit about Soho, do you have as London is called the city of neighborhoods, do you have a favorite neighborhood in London?
I do love Soho. I live in Soho as well. So they had studios in Soho. I live in Soho. I live a couple blocks down, and I do love it here. It's gritty, also sketchy, but I mean, I think it's something about this neighborhood. Like when you meet your neighbors, I like other neighbors who aren't causing problems. You're like, all right, we're in this together, and there's some cool things happening. There's a massive project that's starting. Like I think breaking grant. They've already done the breaking grant ceremony, but there's a huge affordable housing project that's going in. They're building some like condos as well, which is I don't know. I'm interested to see what happens there. Also, they just built Nishwashnangong. It's an Indigenous child care center right across from my house, and it's amazing to see that in the neighborhood. Like so I do really like it here, even though like there's some moments and yeah, there's some moments here and there for sure. But yeah, I do I love Soho for life.
What about a small business that you couldn't live without? Now, that doesn't have to be just like a food place or something like that.
Small business that I couldn't live with. I'm trying to like literally think of one that like that I always have to use. Oh, that's tougher, I think, than family circle. Oh, actually, I know small. Okay, vintage tone wheels amp repair.
Absolutely. Number one,
Don't run
number
my
one.
business without Michael Bennell, and he's an absolute gem. And if you ever need any guitar amplifiers fixed, take it to Mike. He's just best of the best.
Hmm. Great dude. I'm gonna vouch on that one. Like I've never met a person who just like gets like what you need done so efficiently and so well, is like such a nice person, you're paying for the quality of the work, like he's the best. Absolutely.
Yeah, he's vintage tone wheel restorations, and he does keyboards as well.
It's so sweet. Yeah, I've had my trainer amp mess up on me so many times, and he's always there to save it. It's so great. Um, what about if oh, Aaron, did I ask that question that you were supposed to ask? I'm so sorry. I
No,
just
no, no, we're off on our colors, so it's my turn still. But you were just
Oh,
about
okay, my
to.
bad.
Sorry, we have a little outline that we have color coded.
Okay,
We're
all
very
good.
organized.
I see.
uh,
I got off on the color coding. I completely forgot. Now I've messed it all up.
uh, so one of our questions is, if you have a day off, I always like to say Saturday because that's my day off, but it might not be yours. And so from when you wake up to when you go to sleep, if you were to have a perfect day in London, what would it entail? We always like to say kind of unlimited money, like don't go crazy, obviously, but like if you're like, oh, it's not, I can go out for breakfast, lunch, dinner, go see a show, all that stuff. What would be a perfect day?
Yeah, so family circle breakfast, sure, no doubt there. Probably circle breakfast, drop by the Goodwill on Horton because it's right on the way. See if I can get anything good there. Probably head downtown to like the market, eat lunch there. I love New Delhi Deli. Um, and then head down Dundas and hit every pawn shop on Dundas.
Mm-hmm.
That's it's a thing I do. People get mad at me because I'll be like, they'll see a piece of equipment I have, and where'd you get that? And I'll be like, oh, well, I got it for super cheap, like some, like 10% of the real cost. And they'll say, oh, you always get the good deals. I'm like, because I'm out there hunting. I'm like in the pawn shops on Saturday, like trying to be friends with the owners and all this. So yeah, I would definitely want to do that. And I mean, dinner, probably order in Typhoon on Dundas. Love Typhoon, my favorite. And when I go see a show, I might stay home because I'm tired of working on music sometimes. Like,
Totally.
I mean, that's more often the case than not. It's sort of like a downside of working in the music industry, of course, but you find yourself with a day off and you're like, I've been blasting music this entire week. I just need some time to like sit at home and relax. So yeah, I think
Put off the
yeah,
shoulders.
but if there's if some sort of really great show happening, I want to I want to be out there supporting my friends too. So
Absolutely.
If
That's a
you're
good
at home and you're just chilling, is there like a show that you're watching on TV or a movie, or is it just you like to relax in the silence?
I do like to watch some shows, but all my favorite shows like ended. It was like with everyone, it was like Better Call Saul and but I don't watch a ton of shows. Like, I mean, generally it's like just reruns of stuff too. Lately has been that, because a lot of times at the studio, I'll get home 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and then I only have like an hour or two before I go to bed. So not a ton of time. Sometimes also you get home and it's time to send invoices, and as the small business people know, it's like, you get off work and you go home and it's like, okay, I'm going to do some relaxing and I'm going to make some tea, go to the computer, respond to the emails that people sent me today. So sometimes that is relaxing to me. I don't mind it too much, but yeah, sometimes you just sit in the silence. I also have a dog too, so I'll take the dog out for a walk.
Nice.
Yeah.
What's your dog's name so everybody knows?
Kylo.
Kylo.
Yeah,
Amazing.
he's great. I bring him to the studio once in a while, but unfortunately, when I first introduced him to Winston, he almost killed Winston.
Mhm.
And he's a sweet. I just had no idea. He's like really calm dog, really super sweet. But I brought him in here, and he took a chomp at Winston, and Winston needed surgery and stuff. So sorry to
Yeah.
all those Winston fans out there. Now, aka now Kylo haters. No, but he's a lovely dog, and some of my clients have had the pleasure of meeting him. So.
Oh, you know what? It's sometimes it's in their nature, you know what I mean? That a cat looks like food. What about a hidden gem in the city? Now, this could be a person, place, or a thing.
Hidden gem.
Hmm.
Hmm. Actually, and this isn't just because I work there, but I think OE is a hidden gem in the city.
Totally.
And I say that because there's a lot of good work that comes out of. There's a lot of great graduates who run a lot of the audio in the city. MIA has lots of grads, obviously, too, that do a lot of the work in the city. But I say hidden gem because I meet people who, like, I'll take them there. Maybe sometimes I'll do like a mixing session there if there's an off day or something. And they say, yeah, I've lived in London for 20 years and I never knew this place existed. And that's even like sometimes, like if I get a ride there, like an Uber ride or something, they'll be like, well, you going to work? And I'm like, yeah, I work at the school. It's like a recording school. Like, I teach there. And they're like, what? Like, what do you, because it's in an odd, it's like just south of the city. It's way out of the way. And it's what brought me to London as well. And every time that people hear about it, they keep hearing about it over and over. They're like, "Oh yeah, I just found out about this place, Oh Yard," and then they hear about it again, and then they talk to someone else who's doing sound or AV work or working in any industry, even in the music industry, and they're like, "Oh yeah, someone told me about OER. Oh, I know Simon," and they'll be like, "Yeah, Simon, I know Simon. He taught me the one year." So yeah, I think OER is truly a hidden gem in London, Ontario, and especially just because it's been around so long too. It's been around since like the early '80s.
Hmm.
So yeah,
That's amazing.
I gotta second that because I didn't hear about OER probably until I was like just in my early 20s, just because Thomas had to do a little drum session there. And we were coming home from something. He goes, "Do you mind if we stop there for an hour? I got to record something and then we can go." And I was like, "What do you mean? Like, there's a whole recording school in this side of the city?" Like, I had absolutely no idea. And now, just like you said, I hear about it all the time. It's like, "Oh, yeah, this so and so's doing this." I used to work in the production space, and I like, because I knew about them, I'm like, "Oh, I'm going to reach out to see if there's any audio recorders that can help us with like these video stuff." And I like opened up the box to our whole, now we have like our best local audio recorder from OER doing all of our commercials.
I'm one of many audio recorders. I can't, but and also, I mean, there's graduates from that program who've been working in the industry for 20 plus years. Actually, Andy McGoffin, who owned this place before me, he was a graduate from there from like 1994. So there is like a long tradition. There's not as many jobs in that industry in London, so you don't always run into them. But yeah, eventually you start hearing about it, and then you know someone who went there or who is maybe going to go there. I mean, it's incredible that in a city the size of London, we have like a couple hundred audio grads every year if you count Fanshawe and OER together. It's and even like some of the popular music grads from Western as well, they do some like computer production courses. So you're looking at like a really high concentration, and that's part of why I feel so lucky to do this in this city.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's great.
Absolutely. You know, the competition is fierce, but we all know where to go. We're on to our last section of the podcast episode here, Simon. This is time for the final game of the episode. It's time for a classic game. I was like Erin to explain it. She does a way better job than me. I tend to try to explain this, and I feel like I stumble over myself, and I explain it a few times. Erin, why don't you explain our game here before we get into it?
Well, so we are going to give you two options of things in London that are pretty similar, and you have to choose, which gives us to the name of the game. You have to choose this,
Or
that.
that.
So we're going to give you two options. You don't need to think too hard. No explanation needed. Sorry if you hurt people's feelings. Just go with your gut, and and you see what you say.
All right, I'm ready for this.
All right.
All right, number one, Western Fair Market or Covent Garden Market?
Covent Garden Market.
Grooves Records or Odyssey Records?
Grooves.
Masonville Mall or White Oaks Mall?
Masonville.
Locomotive Cafe or Sidetrack Cafe?
Locomotive.
Springbank Park or Gibbons Park?
Springbank.
Fanshawe College or Western University?
Western.
Wortley Village or Old East Village?
Soho. I mean, Old East Village.
London Brewing Co-op or Anderson Craft Ales? What was that?
Anderson.
Anderson. Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
didn't hear it there. Knights game or Majors game?
Knights.
Brown and Dixon or City Lights?
Sorry, Simon, say that one more time. Just came in low.
Brown and Dixon.
Brown and Dixon.
Bike the Thames Valley Parkway or hike one of our environmentally significant areas?
I'm a all year round biker, so definitely biking. The TV. I've
Dangerous,
done
man.
all the routes.
Dangerous, man.
The fat tires on.
Mhm.
Black Walnut or Asmara Coffee?
Black Walnut.
Powerhouse or Storm Stayed Breweries?
Powerhouse.
Powerhouse, okay.
Richmond Row or Dundas Place?
Dundas Place.
Harris Park or Victoria Park?
Victoria Park.
And finally, Highland Cinema or Mustang Drive-In.
Mustang driving.
Yeah. There you go. Got one for a Mustang. Way to go, Simon. You
Nicely
made it through.
done.
Woohoo.
That's a tough one. Some of those are I think that's gonna pull the local community apart more than anything.
Oh,
Yeah.
we've done it on our Instagram page, and I've done the this or that's, and the amount of comments or DMs we get where it's like, how can people be voting for this one? It's absolutely ridiculous.
I know, and so many explanations. A lot of times it's like I just have gone to a place more, so I'm like, I'm not gonna vote for the other place.
Yeah.
But that's on me. I should get that list and then I'll make sure that I go to the other places more.
Try out everything.
Yeah, we'll send it to you. Absolutely. Like hit it 2023, everything on the list. Well, Simon, is there anything else you want to leave with our listeners before we say thank you and goodbye for this episode?
I think thanks to you guys for doing a podcast about London. I think London, it's easy to hate on London, whether you live here, whether you don't live here. But I think this city has a lot to offer, and you do have to look a little harder sometimes. But this city, I've been lucky that it's given me everything I need, and I think that if you're out there and you're thinking that any city is going to give you everything you need quickly, it does take time, but you just got to look in the right places.
Nice.
Absolutely. Love that. Thank you so much, Simon. We really appreciate
Hey, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm Simon Larochette from the Sugar Shack recording studio in London, Ontario. You're listening to London's Pretty Cool podcast.